Welcome to the 8-minute TrumpCare update from the University of St. Thomas Healthcare MBA. My name is John McVeigh. We've just returned with our program from Washington, D.C., where we attended a very exciting seminar. Right at the time, a lot of the debate was going on healthcare reform. And so with us today, we have a couple of our stakeholders who we're going to discuss some of the progress and some of the opportunities and challenges still facing us in the area of healthcare reform. So with us today we have Tom Patno, a retired healthcare executive and orthopedic surgeon, and we have Dan McLaughlin, Executive Fellow on St. Thomas Healthcare MBA. We're going to structure the conversation as usual around the 5 questions that we've given our other guests. And so I wanted to start off with you, Dan. From everything that's been discussed in the last month, there have been a lot of changes in healthcare. What gives you most hope?
Well, one of the things that was pretty exciting about our seminar actually was, as we listened to experts from all different sides of the political spectrum and policy people and elected people, was that there were lots of really good ideas, and inside all the debate, there are probably answers to what need to be done in the American healthcare system. So I'm very hopeful that even in Washington, D.C., the answers are there. We're just going to have to figure out how to get them into the policy and into the legislative language.
Okay. Tom? What gives you hope?
I would concur. I think there's lots of reasons for hope right now, some of which we saw in D.C. People are still talking out there in spite of what the media might lead us to believe. The other reasons, I think, are that the Trump administration, among others, learned in the last few weeks that healthcare really is complex, and who knew? The focus has shifted from simply getting things done quickly to doing the right things, and that gives me lots of hope. I think there's also a lot of other reasons for hope with all the talk about repeal and replace. It was pretty apparent to me in D.C. that repeal is in the eye of the beholder, and I think that opens up a window of opportunity for all the stakeholders to find some common ground.
Okay, thank you. Dan, on the other side, what still gives you concern about where we are in the healthcare debate?
Well, one of the challenges I think right now is that insurance companies have to start thinking about how they're going to, or if they're going to, offer insurance in 2018. And so as the legislation activities kind of slowly roll out, I think that's making it harder and harder for people to make those kind of decisions. And so my concern is that both the HHS department and or the Congress don't make actions that allow insurance to really be effectively delivered in 2018.
Okay. Tom, what concerns do you still have?
Some of the concerns mentioned by previous guests, I think, are still on the list of my concerns, including the minimal essential benefits clause, which is on the chopping block. This was mentioned by Dan previously, that creates a lot of risk for healthcare access, particularly care in terms of behavioral health, which could cripple our efforts to stem the tide of the opioid crisis in this country. I'm also concerned that we'll move too quickly away from some of the learnings over the past few years in terms of value-based care, bundles of care, and accountable care organizations and the like. There's some talk of quickly moving away from those, which I think would be an error at this point.
Okay. So, Dan, there's been a lot of debate, a lot of topics. What's not been talked about? What's the absent question or issues that really has not played a role in the debate that you'd like to see more central?
Well, I think one of the kind of questions that really affects a lot of people in this country is the Medicaid program. And so we had a lot of debate about whether we ought to expand Medicaid or whether we ought to have different parts of it or work requirements. And I think that we really need to understand how Medicaid fits into our whole social safety net. One of the things that is kind of interesting is we talk about work requirements, and yet if you look at the Medicaid population, half the people are already working, and a big chunk of the rest of them are disabled or retired. And so you really only have about 8% of the Medicaid population that's not working. And so then you say, well, that's really not what it's not the perception people have of Medicaid. So we really need to start thinking about that lower income part of our country, how healthcare is delivered to them, and how they fit into the bigger picture. And I hope we start having some of those discussions.
Okay. What do you think the absent questions or the issues undiscussed are?
Yeah, I would piggyback off Dan's comments. There's a couple of things that I would like to hear discussed more frequently at all levels of government. The first being the national debt that our country is burdened by. That's going to be a huge issue that will affect all areas of industry, including healthcare. And At the same time, healthcare is one of the challenges we have in paying down our national debt, largely because of the expense of Medicaid and Medicare type programs. I think those interrelated issues are going to be huge. I'm not hearing enough talk about how will we get under the national debt issue and how will we control healthcare costs. Both of those interrelated issues, I think, deserve a lot more attention than I'm hearing lately.
Okay. And putting policy a little bit on the side, from an executive perspective, think of an executive working in the healthcare industry. What should be top on their desk? What should be the top of their agenda from an executive perspective?
Well, I think all the performance stuff that Tom talked about is still very critical, but I think from the kind of the thinking about how an executive manages their healthcare system, I think they need to think more carefully about how they fit into their state. So I would say amongst the debate that we had in Congress and the election and what we heard when we went to the DC seminar, there's going to be more state-based stuff coming along. So I would say that a good executive would want to make sure that they have good connection to their state legislators, to their state health department, to their state human services department. And I think there's actually going to be more flexibility, which is kind of exciting, that maybe they can craft some new unique solutions that fits their state and their healthcare system. So that's where I'd put my energy.
Tom, from the executive perspective?
Again, along the lines of what Dan mentioned, there's lots of things I think that an executive can do, whether in the healthcare industry or another industry, and that is to not get all wound up in all the talk about politics. At the end of the day, healthcare is about creating health and wellness, and I think we can all do that in one way or another as an executive, particularly in healthcare. There's been talk again amongst the panelists here about the social determinants of health and how important those are in the end product of health and wellness. Everyone, particularly executives in any industry, has an influence on the social determinants of health. Senator Dernberger always used to tell his classes, start with where you're at, and I think that would be a good take-home message for all executives. Start where you're at, see how you can partner with people around you to impact the social determinants of health.
Okay. Finally, Dan, we've asked you this a few times. I hope you've got some big ideas left. We ask you, what's your big idea? It doesn't have to be solve all the problems in all the world in healthcare, but is there something interesting, something you've come across, a startup, an idea? What's an interesting big idea for you?
Actually, I'm going to go back to our very first TrumpCare video, which we had Mark Haddix here, who was the marketing director of General Mills. And he came with a kind of different view of the healthcare system. He said, I can't understand why I can go to Amazon and I can just buy stuff easily. And I go to the healthcare system, it's the most complicated, crazy, consumer unfriendly system there is. And so I think that healthcare executives I know have spent the last 4 or 5 years, quote, doing the ACA. They've been doing what they needed to do to get the systems working. They're kind of done with that, and even though there may be some changes in Congress, it's time for them to move on. So my big idea is, let's starting using the computers, the same thing that the retailers are using. Let's start rethinking about how we deliver healthcare, and then perhaps we can make it less expensive, more consumer friendly. That's a very exciting future, so I'm looking forward to that.
Okay. Tom, what's your big idea?
I would concur. Maybe we're on the same big idea page. That technology innovation is where healthcare needs to be. We have done a lot of, I think, the foundational work in getting where Dan's vision is over the past 5 or 6 years. I think we need to start leveraging that now and really doing good with the technology that we have.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you both for your conversation. We've just returned, as we said, from DC, and there's been probably a hiatus in policy changes in healthcare. And we're going to take a short hiatus with our TrumpCare updates. And we will return when there are some new interesting developments. And we've learned a lot from all our St. Thomas stakeholders. And I'd like to thank you all. And we will return when there's some new interesting outcomes. Thank you.
Thanks.